New Guinea, a land of mystery and danger. It's been said that it contains more strange and new and beautiful things than any other part of the globe. Located off the coast of Southeast Asia, just north of Australia, this rugged and vast tropical island was one of the last places on Earth to be explored by white men.
It's been thought of as the last undiscovered place, the most unexplored, the most other.
Tantalizing glimpses of the fierce people who lived in New Guinea, as well as the island's stunning plant and animal life, have long lured Western adventurers looking to make new discoveries. They were not disappointed.
You really have no way of knowing what you're going to find when you go there. You turn a corner and there's something that you can't believe you're seeing.
New Guinea is a land of possibility. This island of 8 million people continues to captivate the imagination of Western scientists and explorers. It's one of the few places where cultural and biological discoveries are still being made. And perhaps most enticing to outsiders has been the discovery of valuable natural resources like gold and oil.
Increasingly, as natural resources are depleted elsewhere in the world, New Guinea is one of the last places where you can find these things.
Because of this, New Guineans are now struggling with the challenge of developing their natural resources and becoming a modern nation. As they do, they risk losing the very thing that makes New Guinea unlike any other place on Earth: its unsurpassed cultural and biological diversity. In the late 1920s, reports of a gold strike in New Guinea drew a wave of outsiders seeking their fortune to the island. Among them were 3 Australian brothers. Mick, Dan, and Jim Leahy trudged off into the rugged highlands where no white men had gone before. New Guinean porters from the coast accompanied them on their journey into an area thought to be uninhabited by humans. The Leahys took a camera along to document their expedition. What they discovered was beyond anything they had imagined.
What they found was huge valleys that they weren't expecting and huge populations. They found another 1 million or so people whom nobody knew existed before. A very isolated people who had no contact with the coast whatsoever. These people were captured on film, and there's the fright, there's the astonishment, the initial contact and the fear, and then the attempts at etiquette of communication.
The Leahys had no idea what to expect in this first encounter with the Highlanders.
The Lay brothers were surrounded by often thousands of uncontacted people, people who had never seen white people before. All of those uncontacted people, or at least all the adult men, had an axe, a stone axe, maybe a spear, maybe a set of bows and arrows, all of which that could do you in.
But the Highlanders were in awe of their visitors and approached them with restraint. At first, they believed the white men were the ghosts of their dead ancestors. But once they realized these visitors were humans and were trespassing on their land, the Highlanders regarded the Leahys as invaders. Traditionally, this would have meant war. But though the local people had strength in numbers, the Leahys had technology on their side and didn't hesitate to impress the Highlanders with a show of deadly force.
To show them the power of a gun, they will buy a pig and then they'll shoot the pig. And the message, of course, is that if we can shoot a pig dead with one shot, we can shoot you dead with one shot.
Spears and arrows were no match for guns. The Highlanders had little choice but to let the Leahys in. But it wasn't always this way. For hundreds of years, Westerners could barely gain a toehold in New Guinea. Spanish and Portuguese explorers venturing to the farthest reaches of the globe first stumbled across New Guinea in the 1500s, but they didn't settle there.
The entire area around the edge is this kind of swampy, mangrovey, crocodile-infested coast, lots of malaria, lots of bugs and things. People landed there, they spent a little bit of time there, and then they took off because it wasn't a pleasant place to live.
For the next several hundred years, only a few hardy Westerners ventured ashore, but they did so at tremendous personal risk. They were in danger of crossing paths with some of the most ferocious people on Earth.
The people who went ashore to get fresh water for their sailing ships were attacked and killed, and carted off and eaten. Many of the early missionaries were lured into a longhouse, clubbed on the head, consumed, their skull planted at the base of the longhouse to, sort of as fertilizer.
The fact that few Westerners went to New Guinea, and even fewer came back, created a certain mystique around the island.
People were always looking for minerals and gold, so there were fanciful stories which they made up, really, about what they thought they were going to find. You get these fantasies of explorers going in and finding fabulously wealthy sort of civilizations hidden away.
These fantasies were not so far from the truth. As early explorers would discover, there were civilizations hidden away, hundreds of them. And though they were not rich by Western standards, the New Guineans had a wealth of cultural diversity. Each group had its own forms of dress and customs, and each spoke a different language.
If you're talking about the entire island of New Guinea, you're looking at something like 1,000 languages, which is getting close to about a third of the languages of the world.
We're talking about lots and lots of different cultures. Each language group, in essence, is a signal that there's a different culture there. People that aren't speaking the same language are having different habits and different lifestyles and ways of life.
There are even situations where males speak one language and women speak an alternative language. The complexity of it is mind-boggling.
This complexity developed over New Guinea's long history. Civilization on the island has been evolving for some 40,000 years, and even in ancient times, it was remarkably advanced. New Guineans were among the first people on Earth to cross large bodies of water.
Europeans weren't capable of crossing the Mediterranean until about 10,000 years ago. New Guinea people were capable of making an equivalent voyage 40 or 50,000 years ago.
New Guineans were also some of the first in the world to cultivate crops. Agriculture on the island dates back 9,000 years.
It's an enormous amount of time, and to put that into perspective, Europeans 5,000–10,000 years ago were extremely primitive. I mean, they were wearing furs and painting themselves blue.
But though New Guinean society was highly developed, it was also cut off from the rest of the world. 10,000 years ago, during the last ice age, New Guinea and Australia were joined into one continent. But as the ice melted and the oceans rose, New Guinea became a large and isolated island.
It's the largest tropical island in the world. It's actually 1,500 miles long, and at its broadest, it's about 500 miles wide. It's also a very high island because it goes up to 13,000 and 14,000 feet, which is as high as the Rockies.
Because of New Guinea's rugged geography, groups developed in isolation from each other, separated by mountains, jungles, and swamps. But as these disparate cultures evolved, a common characteristic emerged. Their identity was inseparable from the natural world around them.
New Guinea people are closely related to their land and to the spirits that are within the land, to their forests, to the rocks and the trees.
This close relationship to the natural world has been key to the New Guineans' survival. They have depended on the land for food and shelter. Complex social customs governing hunting and trade have helped to maintain a balance between different groups so that the abundance of their land was not depleted. Even today, New Guineans believe there is no difference between themselves and their ancestral lands.
They believe that, for instance, their ancestors' spirits are still animating what we would think of as the forest. And when they go and hunt in the forest, it's not that they're going to get some of nature. They're going to their clan's land and they're taking something from it, but that's already a part of their family. It's already a part of their life and their social group.
New Guineans protect their land with the same ferocity that they protect their extended families. If an outsider steps across their boundaries, it can be cause for war. And when war is declared, everyone gets involved.
Social structure is such that you have extended family groups that we might think of as clans. And those extended family groups have rights and responsibilities to each other. Those clans often come into conflict with each other. And the way that those conflicts were worked out traditionally often was quite violent.
New Guineans use ritualized warfare as a way to maintain social equilibrium between groups. But the point is to humiliate rather than kill the enemy. New Guinea's Highlanders are some of the most aggressive people on the island. So it was not surprising that when the Leahy brothers first made contact, they felt threatened by the Highlanders. Fearful that any show of vulnerability would prove their undoing, the Leahys protected themselves ruthlessly and responded to even the most trivial conflicts by shooting to kill. Over the course of several expeditions, more than 100 Highlanders were killed or wounded at the Leahys' hands. The Leahys also misunderstood another custom: trade. They brought trade goods that the Highlanders prized, such as gold-lipped pearl shells from the New Guinea coast, and used them to broker a fragile truce. The Leahys also traded for food, but in the simple act of trading, there was a vast gulf of misunderstanding. For the Leahys, trade was a way to get what they needed so they could continue their expedition and move on. For the Highlanders, exchanging goods implied a bond that should last a lifetime.
Exchange doesn't ever mean just once. Exchange means a series of transactions that go on for the life of the participants. Those exchanges build a social relationship that is the most enduring part of society.
This notion of exchange is still so deeply rooted that it forms the basis of New Guinean social structure.
Individuals don't exist as individuals. One person and another person come into being as human beings through their interactions with each other. And it's incredibly different than Western-derived notions of self.
New Guineans' sense of self is also derived from their interactions with the plants and animals on the island. Many clans understand themselves in relationship to specific animals, animals that are not to be found anywhere else on Earth. The bird of paradise is revered by many Highland clans, who mimic its plumage and base their most sacred ceremonial dances on the bird's behavior. Other unique animals on the island include the tree-dwelling kangaroo and the cassowary, a large and powerful flightless bird related to the ostrich.
You also have crabs that can climb coconut trees. They're very huge nippers, and they climb up coconut trees and bring down coconuts. Now, you don't find those in many parts of the world.
All these wondrous creatures hold special significance for the people of New Guinea and have drawn scientists from around the world who come to study them.
A lot of people refer to it as a biologist's paradise, if you will, because of the wide diversity of wildlife, and flora and fauna.
New Guinea is the great species generator. Sits right next to the equator, gets a lot of humidity, and the high mountains also create lots of different ecological niches where animals and plants can evolve. And it's been cooking these species over millions of years and creating this wonderful diversity.
But more than the natural wonders of New Guinea, it was the 1933 discovery of gold in the highlands by the Leahy brothers that brought in a flood of outsiders. Gold, a mineral that the Highlanders neither recognized nor valued, would usher in an era of change as the Highlanders confronted the outside world. Life as they had lived it for thousands of years would be altered dramatically. Once again, the Leahys struck a trade agreement with the Highlanders. In exchange for their labor and for allowing the Leahys to extract the gold from their land, the Highlanders were given Western goods, which they valued highly. It would take the Highlanders years to recognize this trade relationship was out of balance. But by then, this uneven trade had set the precedent for the decades of Western interest in New Guinea which followed. Since the Leahys first arrived in 1930, a steady stream of other Westerners have come to the New Guinea highlands. Biologists and anthropologists have come to study the forest and its people. Timber, petroleum, and mining companies have also come, attracted by New Guinea's wealth of natural resources.
New Guinea is in an interesting position globally because it is one of these places that has a lot of its natural resources left. It's incredibly forested. It's sitting on an enormous vein of gold. It's sitting on ridiculously large oil fields. New Guinea is in a position where lots of other countries want its natural resources.
Developing those resources is the present-day challenge facing New Guineans. The island of New Guinea is divided into two different nations with dramatically different views of development. In 1963, Indonesia took over the western half of New Guinea, and natural resources were put under government control. By contrast, when the eastern half of the island became the independent nation of Papua New Guinea in 1975, the land and its resources were put under control of the people.
New Guinea is one of the only places in the world where indigenous people own the land. 97% of the land in the country is owned by the indigenous people.
But owning the land does not necessarily mean that Papua New Guineans have been able to profit from it.
Most of the enterprise there, most of the large corporate development is by outsiders, by the Westerners. And all the wealth tends to stay in the hands of a very few political elite in Papua New Guinea and basically outsiders. So the material wealth, the gold, the oil, the gas, the tuna, the timber, tends to be converted very rapidly into foreign exchange, and that money disappears.
It's difficult to raise all the capital within a country. I mean, we have a small economy. There are very few players. Even our banks aren't really that well capitalized to be able to finance all the operations that are going on in terms of resource development.
But in turning to foreigners to finance and manage these projects, New Guineans are losing control over their land.
Groups that come in negotiate with the individual land-owning entities, which are the communal societies, and it's the group that is most easily tricked and manipulated in terms of making promises of quick, immediate wealth that in the long term really doesn't eventuate.
And so what Papua New Guineans are losing is autonomy over their resources. And that's the thing that has kept them stable and safe for all of these years.
New Guineans are starting to understand just how high the stakes are as they pursue development. Activists are educating the people about their land rights and how to protect themselves against unscrupulous developers. And as New Guineans learn to navigate the perils of modernization, they increasingly find themselves pulled in two directions: toward their rich traditions of the past and the lore of the Western world.
My friends in New Guinea, especially my friends that are young, they want Western educations. My best friend in New Guinea wants to be a nurse, and she wants to live in a ranch-style house and listen to the Beastie Boys. I have another friend, and he said, my people have lived in this forest for thousands of years, and I want to live in a town now.
There is a mismatch between traditional culture and modern development. There's an obvious desire by people to have the material assets of modern society, to have a decent education for their children, to have a comfortable modern life. But in relationship to that, there's also their communal responsibilities and their spiritual responsibilities to their land. And it's difficult to satisfy all of those things at once.
That's the challenge we have, to be able to still retain and preserve our culture and still be full participants in this globalized modern economy.
For the people of New Guinea, their connection to the land and to each other has been key to their survival. But as they embrace Western-style development, they must now forge a relationship with the outside world. How will that relationship transform the land and the people, whose cultures and traditions go back more than 40,000 years?